Penn State football taking on Illinois this Saturday for homecoming at Beaver Stadium. And as always, we want to get you a breakdown of the opponent that week for Penn State football here on the BWI Daily Edition. I'm your host, Thomas Frank Carr. Joining me today from Illinois, it's Scott Richey of the News Gazette to give us an idea of what's going on with first-year head coach at Illinois, Bret Bielema. Scott, thank you for coming on the show today. Appreciate your time.
Well, thanks for having me.
So I know that this has been something that just about everyone in the college football world has talked about this week at some point, and you've probably talked about it quite a bit. Bret Bielema's press conference today, earlier this week, he said something that was rather interesting, I think. And I'm going to play you. It's about a minute, 10 seconds. I want to play for everyone who, in case you didn't see it or you didn't see the quotes, I want to see what he said earlier this week when talking to the media.
You're only as good as your roster, right? I kind of learned that the first time I went to the Kentucky Derby, right? Nobody was betting on the jockeys. Everybody was betting on the horses, right? So to win the Derby, you got to have the right horse, and I think our players are going to be a reflection of what our program stands for. And you know, I stood at the front of the room last year when I took over and said everybody is invited back because of COVID. They gave me the opportunity to do that. But as this roster continues to transition, I've got to make tough decisions. Players have to make decisions. And you know, the roster is going to have to change to get to where we want to be to win the championship. So I recognize that probably midway through the spring last year, through the summer, just certain positions haven't maybe played out the way they envisioned them to. In particular, the offensive line, I don't believe we have a player in the two deep that they've recruited here over the last 3 years that is really significantly doing anything for us in the playing department. And that's a major concern, right? So that's something that we have to do. Top two quarterbacks that have played to this point are both transfers, right? So there hasn't been any development at that position that is significantly playing right now. Isaiah was that guy, but he's obviously playing a wide receiver position in Deuce. So defensively, we knew there was going to be an evolution just kind of on the style of defense that we played. We got to definitely get a lot of bigger bodies, I believe, up front to get what we want to get done to play in this league at a consistent level.
So those are his comments about his roster in some specificity, I might add. This is still the kind of get-to-know-you phase for Bret Bielema in the Illinois media and with the fans. So I want to ask you, how do you think, and how did, to what you've seen, the fans interpret what he said about his players there?
Well, in any situation like this, there's going to be a reaction from maybe both sides of the argument, but the majority, I guess, just based on social media, and that's an awful thing sometimes, you saw it as Bret Bielema throwing at least his offensive line and quarterbacks under the bus. I don't think that was the intent. I think it was more an indictment of Lovie Smith's coaching staff and maybe the recruiting misses over the last few years, and there have been a ton. And Lovie's recruiting classes were ranked in the bottom of the Big Ten as his final seasons in Champaign played out. Got a chance to talk with a couple players yesterday. We'll get another opportunity to do that today. They didn't take offense to that. I think they, Doug Kramer, the offensive lineman, 6-year player, just said it was a little bit of noise on a Monday. So I don't think inside that building that there's any kind of controversy. Doug Kramer, Chase Brown, starting running back, said they were firmly behind Bret Bielema.
Mm-hmm. How did you take it? How did you interpret that? And what is there any context of what we should know about maybe the question or what people were talking about that kind of led to this in the press conference?
I mean, a lot of Monday's press conference was sort of focused on recruiting because of the bye week last week, and coaches were out, and you got a chance to evaluate some players, and it's that's a big part of what Bret Bielema's doing. Right now it's he is trying to build a program, and a bye week was a perfect opportunity to go out and sell his vision for Illinois football. He has more context, especially on the offensive line. I mean, of their top 7 linemen, 4 are 5th-year players, and Doug Kramer, the starting center, is a 6th-year player. They're all gone next year. And the the cupboard is bare behind them a little bit. Julian Pearl, and like I'm not sure, with the bonus year of eligibility, I honestly don't know how many more years he can be here. Like it's thrown like the eligibility question is just kind of crazy. But like
Yeah.
he's got 2 more years at least after this, so he stepped into a bigger role. That's kind of it, and I mean that's the context that maybe was missing if you don't maybe understand the roster. But just I guess personally, I mean what Bret Bielema said is I think what every first year coach is probably thinking. I mean, it's a brand new group of players to him, and it's maybe they don't fit what he's trying to do. That could be any coach. It's just you don't often hear the quiet part said out loud.
Yeah.
And
yeah, that's exactly how I think that's a fair way to phrase that. Absolutely.
Well, Bret Bielema, I mean, just from getting a chance to know him a little bit, and I had kind of jumped back into football, later. I had sort of just shifted over just to basketball only, kind of when he was hired, but got back involved, this summer, and so I haven't had as much opportunity to get to know him, but he just strikes me as kind of a straight shooter that says what he thinks, and he did that on Monday.
Yeah, I'd say. And I want to get to that a little bit later when we talk about the defensive line, because his comments there at the end to me, when we talk about some of those situations, I think are a little bit more nuanced than the offensive line, because just from what we've seen on film, the offensive line in general, there's been some, I think it's fair to say, up and down play. How would you assess their play so far this season as far as what they've tried to do and how they've done it?
Just from an offensive line standpoint?
Sure. Yeah.
I think run blocking has been pretty solid, and that's shown in a couple of games. Purdue, where Josh McCray, kind of had his breakout performance, and I mean he's obviously a huge back and hard to bring down, but he had some big holes. And then again in Charlotte, Chase Brown rushed for 257 yards, and he made a lot of that happen. A lot of yards after contact, but again, the offensive line blocked pretty well in the run game. Their pass protection has been an issue. They haven't given up a ton of sacks, more to Brandon Peters than Art Sikowski, because Brandon has a tendency to hold on to the ball a little too long. But both quarterbacks, whoever's playing, they both played about equally because of injuries to Brandon Peters. They're getting pressured a lot. So there's some issues there that have cropped up, and I'm not sure what the answer is, because you're looking at a lot of guys that have played a lot of college football, and it's just it's not happening for them in pass pro, which is sort of just not happening in the passing game in general. For Illinois, from the quarterbacks not making the throws to the receivers not being able to create separation to the offensive line, maybe not being able to protect.
And that has been, I think, one of my biggest takeaways about the offense from that position. The quarterback situation, I know Brandon Peters was injured in the last game, and some of the things that Bret Bielema said almost sounded exactly like what James Franklin said this week about his quarterback situation. So do you have any sort of update from what Bielema said earlier this week? And what would you expect this Saturday from that position for Illinois?
Well, Brandon Peters was not cleared to start practice on Tuesday, and Bret Bielema said that he didn't really anticipate that happening. And even if it did happen, say later in the week, say if Brandon was medically cleared on Friday, that's not enough time. Maybe in practice, it wouldn't be in practice at all, but just to throw him in there against Penn State, having not gone through the reps in the specific game plan. So I anticipate Art Sikowski starting again, in his sort of backup, but not the backup role. And I don't know that there's going to be a huge difference, because neither has been super efficient or effective in the passing game. And again, it's not all on the quarterbacks. I mean, there's a lot of moving pieces to the passing game, and there's not maybe moving in harmony right now. But the one thing that Art Sikowski does bring, and has, I think, brought this year, the team seems to rally around him maybe better than they do Brandon Peters. He's more of a vocal leader, and that's just not Brandon's personality, and it never has been. The coaching staff really pushed Brandon in the offseason to kind of be a little more vocal and be a better leader. And I think to mixed results, but Art has some fire. Hasn't always, meant wins. In fact, just won, because as he closed out that Nebraska game. But he'll stand in the pocket, take some shots, try to complete passes. I mean, it's just the effectiveness just hasn't been there. But he certainly gives everything that he's got.
And you mentioned the receivers maybe not creating separation. What's the situation there as far as I know that a couple of quarterbacks have moved to receiver, but also there's I think you mentioned some moving parts. Is it fair to give an evaluation of them so far, or because of those things, or is it genuinely receivers aren't creating separation, there's not guys to throw to, so that creates another layer of difficulty for the quarterback?
I think it's fair halfway through the season to at least evaluate some. And I think the main issue for Illinois is the top two receivers this year were quarterbacks in the spring. And that
tends to be an issue.
Yeah, Isaiah Williams and Deuce Spann have made plays, but they're still really just learning the position, especially Deuce Spann. Because, we entered that Week 0 game against Nebraska thinking he was still a backup quarterback, and then all of a sudden he's on the field as a receiver, which training camp was closed this year at Illinois for the first time in decades. Mm-hmm. So we didn't really get an opportunity to see what was happening behind closed doors, and Deuce Spann as a wide receiver was one of those things that was happening. Casey Washington has had some moments, but there haven't been enough. A guy like Donnie Navarro, who had been kind of a staple piece over the last couple of years, just hasn't really done much. Brian Hightower was one of the best receivers on the team last year, and he was hurt heading into the season, but is healthy now and just is still not playing. Jafar Armstrong, they brought in from Notre Dame to add some depth to that receiver group, was also hurt early in the year. Again, healthy, just not playing. So they totally rebuilt that receiver room, and I think this wasn't ready, for the football season.
So to end on a positive note, you've touched on them already, but the tailback situation seems like it is one of the bright spots for the team. And what do they have there? And do you think that those players can threaten the Penn State defense on Saturday with, knowing they might have to shoulder a large part of the load no matter who the quarterback is for Illinois?
Yeah, I think they have two legitimate options in Chase Brown and Josh McCray, and they're different, which is good. Chase Brown is maybe more of the dynamic athlete, and he's quick, but also has some strength and can break tackles, and then Josh McCray is essentially a tank. 6'1", 240, and just super hard to bring down, and he runs hard. If he can get downhill, he's tough to stop, and he's got a little burst, too. So, they're good. And as I mentioned, run blocking has been pretty decent. 2 weeks ago against Wisconsin, they just punted essentially on the run game. They threw on every down on the first two drives, and I asked their offensive coordinator Tony Peterson about that. Afterwards, he said that was the plan, and it just struck me as a little strange that when you have run the ball well, even against the best rushing defense in the country, maybe just try. And they did.
Give it a try. Just try it once. Yeah.
Yeah, and they didn't. And Chase Brown, had one big run, and maybe he could have had some more. I don't know. That game was maybe not set up for a lot of success for the Illinois offense, but they went away from what they do the best. And I think if they're going to challenge Penn State, it's going to be with Chase Brown and Josh McCray.
So I know that, it's early on in Bret Bielema's tenure so far, but is that the offensive line good as run blockers, good running backs, kind of that part working? Do you think that's indicative of him, the coach, and what he's going to bring to Illinois? Or is this kind of like, okay, this is what we have to work with. These pieces working in this specific way was what he was dealing with, and that's what's gonna work?
I think the sort of the book on Bret Bielema has been he's just this power run game guy. It's the Wisconsin in his background.
Yep.
And he does a lot of that. But if you really looked at his Wisconsin teams, and I think at Arkansas as well, they're pretty balanced offensively between the run and the pass. I think with this Illinois team, the strength certainly lies in the run game. But in an ideal world, I know that he's mentioned this, that he does want more balance, and he talks about complementary football a lot, mostly between the three phases: offense, defense, special teams. But it applies to just the offense, and there has been a lot of complementary football between the run game and the passing game.
And the reason I ask is because this is going to kind of transition into the defensive line and what I've noticed on film, and kind of my issue with his statement about we don't have the guys up front to run what we want to run. We don't have the size, the strength, all that. But those are your players, right? So those are the players you have to work with. And you chose this job to work here at Illinois with a 4-down front from Lovie Smith in that Tampa 2 mold, with guys that maybe are undersized compared to what you'd want to do. Do you think that this transition has been fair on those guys? I know I'm painting my opinion into the question here, but like, is that do you think that that's been a good idea so far? Like, how has that part of the defense worked, knowing that the pieces aren't fitting right now for what they want to do personnel wise?
I think the defense has been, over the last 5 games, the brightest part about the Illinois football team. Ryan Walters, the defensive coordinator, saw his team kind of get torched a couple times in a row. UTSA, Virginia, and made some adjustments to personnel, a little bit to scheme, just in terms of coverage. But up front, guys like Keith Randolph, Johnny Newton have been pretty good. I think maybe, I'm trying to parse Bret Bielema's words here, but just knowing the roster, like there's not a lot of depth up front, and they've had a couple injuries that have hurt that depth as well. But with Randolph and Newton, they've got 2 young guys that I think could be pretty good for them, moving forward. And then it's just a matter of adding to that, because Rod Perry's another 6-year player up front, nose tackle that has been pretty good, but again, he's gone after this year, and there's just maybe fewer options, I think, for him to use. But there's a couple that'll be good. They just don't. There's at a lot of positions they just don't have the numbers behind maybe those starting guys.
Okay, so it is more about kind of the terrain of what he's working with, more so than saying these guys aren't the horses I need. Even though that's what he said, I don't know. I just there was part of that to me that when I listened to that, you get to choose what you do, right? And maybe you don't want to do it right away, and maybe you want to start instilling some things, but it just seems like that's the coaching staff. You're tasked with playing and designing these systems for these players to accentuate their strengths and hide their weaknesses. And if you're just saying, well, what we want to run, they can't run it. And this is a lot of what I've noticed on film of they're running tight fronts, they're running nose tackle, and they're trying to play a more, I guess, a 3-down front with a modern twist, and you've got guys that are 275 pounds playing linebacker, and I have those guys, and Carney is the guy I'm thinking of in particular. How has he adapted to that role of being off the ball a little more, playing the run from a little more depth, and then how has he created a pass rusher in those situations that come out of that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess just with Owen Carney, they are more of a 3-man front, but he has his hand in the dirt, in the grass, in the turf, whatever, a lot. I mean, he's not exactly your stand-up edge rusher. I mean, he'll do that some, but more often than not, especially lately, his hand has been on the ground and going after the quarterback that way. On opposite side of him, they made some moves, so it's been Seth Coleman more than Isaiah Gay. That's more your stand-up, outside linebacker, defensive end hybrid, role. But Owens played well, and I think he's played better. After Ryan Walters did tweak his defense a little bit, he has
Okay.
adjusted the scheme and is just to more suit, I think, the players that he has, and it's been successful. They've not given up, any big scoring games like they did, at Virginia. Of course, in a couple of situations where Illinois had the lead late, the defense has given up one final scoring drive to the opponent that turned the outcome. But a lot of those instances, they've been kind of hung out to dry, on the field forever just because the offense
Right.
didn't gain any traction.
Right.
So it's kind of hard to evaluate the defense completely, given, just like the Wisconsin's game, the Badgers had the ball 43 minutes.
Yeah.
Part of that's the defense can't get off the field on third down, which is, I think, the lingering problem. But
Yeah.
also, the offense is just a lot of 3-and-outs, and Blake Hayes is punting it back to Wisconsin.
And Wisconsin ran the ball an obscene amount in that game. They threw the ball once in the fourth quarter, and I know that they were trying to bleed the clock, but still, they threw the ball once in the entire fourth quarter. So the Jake Hansen has been a player that James Franklin mentioned in his press conferences, somebody that stood out. It's also someone that Bret Bielema talked about earlier this week. What's the situation with him, and do we have any clarity on him at this point?
No clarity yet, other than he won't play this weekend, and
Okay.
he has. Let's see, he missed the Wisconsin game. I think he came back to play against Charlotte, missed the Purdue game, so he's been in and out of the lineup with some injuries all season, really. And the thing that that Bret Bielema said Monday that kind of stuck out to me was that there would be an announcement on Jake, later this week, which I assume will come eventually, but it didn't. Just the phrasing of that didn't make it sound like, old Jake's going to be out this week, but he'll be back with us next week. It sounded
Right.
like something potentially worse. I mean, I'm just guessing a little bit at this point, but it doesn't sound maybe like, it's good news for Jake Hansen, and he's been kind of the rock of this Illinois defense for several years, and especially the last couple as he's been healthy. But yeah, with him out of the lineup, Tariq Barnes and Kalen Tolson have actually played pretty well. Tariq Barnes has stepped up into that Mike linebacker role and been one of Illinois' better defenders. But again, I think they'd prefer to have Jake Hansen back, and honestly, through 3/4 of one game, C.J. Hart was their maybe best defensive player in that Nebraska game, and then he suffered a season-ending knee injury, at the end of that one. So, they had some injury issues on defense, but be curious to see what happens with Jake.
You mentioned getting torched early in the season, making some adjustments. One of the things that stood out to me is the secondary seems to play pretty well together, and they do some more challenging things from that perspective. Is that part of the change? And what have you seen from the back seven, especially the safeties and corners for Illinois?
Well, there was some personnel changes and some scheme changes with the secondary. On a personnel front, Tony Adams, who's a fifth-year player and a captain, a cornerback, has been pulled out of the starting lineup and still getting lots of reps, of course, but they've gone a little younger occasionally on that front. And then Kirby Joseph has really solidified his place at free safety, and can't take it away from him now. I mean, he's got 6 takeaways in the last 5 games. So that's that on the personnel front. Schematically, Ryan Walters was playing a lot of man coverage to start the year. That changed after the Virginia game where they just couldn't stay with the Virginia wide receivers or their giant tight end. So played more zone look, but it's a mix. But they really have moved away from just what was almost solely man coverage, and I think that's better suited the guys that they have.
It's an interesting situation when you see some of that because they still will run man coverage at times. Do you think that part of that change will help in this game in particular, knowing the situation that Penn State has at quarterback, either starting a guy who did not look good versus Iowa or a freshman in Christian Veilleux? One of those guys is going to be starting. At least presumably, that's what we're working on, that assumption. Do you think that that particular unit can keep this game in the ballpark for Illinois, knowing kind of Penn State's situation at quarterback?
Well, I think they're probably going to have to. Just regardless of who the quarterback is. The thing with college football is like, especially maybe if you've got some younger quarterbacks in there, is like make 18, 19, 20-year-olds like make decisions, and because they're not always going to make the right one. So I think the coverage has to be on point, whether that's sticking in man or exploiting the opportunities that zone coverage provides. Where you just there was a play in the Wisconsin game where it was Kirby Joseph interception, and Graham Mertz kind of floated a ball in there, but Kirby was playing back in zone and was able to do what a free safety does, and jump over and take the ball. So I mean, there's got to be that, and I think pass coverage is two-pronged. Like the defense front has to get some kind of pressure, because there's been more than one instance this season where quarterbacks have just been able to kind of camp out in the pocket, do what they want, and not be forced to make decisions in the moment. They have some time to think about it. Just don't give them that time, and I think you can be pretty successful.
So what's your read on Penn State and the matchup in this game? What are the places you're looking at as far as key situations where Illinois may have an advantage, or they may be able to take advantage of something that Penn State has?
Well, I think just based on the last several weeks, I mean, the Illinois defense, I have a feeling we'll force some turnovers. But it's just, again, that's the defense gets the offense the ball, and then there hasn't been a lot of points off those takeaways. I mean, that was a strength under Lovie Smith, was taking the ball away. This team has kept that up. I mean, it's the same player, so I'm not surprised. But it's just, it's really all about the offense for me. And really the passing game has to, I mean, it doesn't have, if it's Art Skowski, if it's Brandon Peters, whoever, they don't have to go out there and throw for 300 yards. But they have to at least be competent and provide at least the idea to the Penn State defense. Okay, you just can't put 8-9 men in the box every down. And Penn State's got a top 25 defense, like total defense in the country. I don't think that sets up well for Illinois. But if there can be any kind of maybe threat in the passing game to go with what I assume they'll go back to the run a little more. You'd think, but it's just there's got to be a little balance there, and then that should maybe keep it competitive. I'm not. I think the line's at 23.5 for a reason. I'm not exactly projecting an Illinois win here, but it just after the Wisconsin game, they just have to be more competitive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's that I think is. Would you say that's fair? That's probably where they need to shoot for the rest of the season, is more competitive under Bret Bielema, making teams earn it. I hate to say these things about a team that probably doesn't think that way themselves, but is that a fair barometer or benchmark for this team?
I think it is, and I mean, yeah, they're out there playing to win their last 5 games, and like that's how you have to approach it. But just from sort of the outside observer's perspective, like they're still a ways away from maybe winning, and winning, or at least winning consistently, especially in the Big Ten. So just competitive football, I think that's the bare minimum, and they've had some of that. They had close games against Maryland and Purdue, and they just need to tap into that, because if it's close, then you never know. Like you can win, but you have to keep it close to have a chance.
Scott Richey of the News Gazette joining us here on the BWI Daily Edition, giving you the insight on Illinois and what's going on under new first-year head coach Bret Bielema. Scott, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
That'll do it for today on the BWI Daily Edition. Don't forget, stay tuned and come back tomorrow. We will have our observations of Penn State from their practice, which is coming up tonight. Nate Bauer joining me for the Bauer Hour, coming to you every Thursday here on the BWI Daily Edition. I'm your host, Thomas Frank Carr. Talk to you tomorrow.